By the time January of 1971 arrived, Danny DeVito was 26 years old. He had survived a childhood that would have broken most men before they reached the starting line. He was still standing, still auditioning, still carrying pain he never named in public. What he had not yet found was someone who could see all of it, the mess and the talent and the hurt and the stubbornness, and choose it without reservation. That was about to change on a single night in a small theater where neither of them had expected anything to happen. Before the world knew his name, before the cameras and the characters and the chaos he brought to every room he entered, there was a boy in New Jersey who learned very early that love was not something you could count on. That it arrived with conditions. That it could be taken back without warning. What nobody told that boy, what nobody could have told him, was that one January night in 1971, a woman was going to walk into a small theater in New York City, forget entirely why she had come, and choose him. Not the version of him that Hollywood would eventually accept. Not the award-nominated, franchise-carrying, industry-respected version. The unfinished version. The broke version. The version sleeping in a Volkswagen Beetle and showering at the YMCA and getting rejected so many times he had stopped counting. She chose that one. And what happened next, across 50 years, 3 children, 2 separations, 38 therapy sessions, and a restaurant table that never changed, is not the love story Hollywood would have written for him. It is something rarer than that. It is a real one. Danny DeVito was born on November 17, 1944, in Neptune, New Jersey, and from the very first moment, the world seemed to be making a point. His mother, Julia, was 40 years old when he arrived. She had already raised several children. She did not want another one. She said so plainly, years later, with the particular honesty of someone who had stopped pretending. 4 words of rejection followed by 6 words of pride, and a little boy left alone in the space between them, deciding which ones to carry. He carried both. He always did. His father owned a candy shop in Asbury Park. Well-liked around town during the day. But when the drinking started at night, something in the house shifted entirely. Danny learned to read those signs the way children in certain kinds of homes always learn to, not as a skill, but as survival. He hid in closets. He ran to neighbors. Between 1950 and 1955, police were called to the DeVito home at least 17 times. That number is not a statistic. That number is a childhood. And underneath all of it, something no one could see from the outside. He had been born with a rare genetic condition called Fairbanks disease. It was the reason he would never grow past 4 feet 10 inches. But the height was almost beside the point. The disease moved through his joints, his hips, his knees, his back, and by the time he was in his 20s, the pain he carried on any average day sat somewhere between a 6 and an 8 out of 10. Hollywood told him to keep that quiet. Weakness was not marketable. So he kept it quiet. And he kept going. New York in the late 1960s was not kind to men who didn't fit the frame. He ended up sharing a $75 a month apartment with a young actor named Michael Douglas, who had quietly kept to himself the fact that his father was Kirk Douglas. They ate canned beans. They split their last $27 on headshots and carried them across the city by hand. Douglas began booking roles. Danny kept getting rejected. He parked cars. He stood motionless in a clothing store window, pretending to be a mannequin. He lived out of the Volkswagen for a stretch that he would not speak about publicly for decades. Hollywood tried to reshape him more than once. One studio made him an offer worth close to $1 million in today's money, not for a role, but for surgery. Procedures that would make his face easier. More comfortable for mainstream audiences. More acceptable to the industry that had already told him in every other way that he was not what it had in mind. He looked at the offer. He burned the contract at a beach bonfire. And the words he said to the casting director who pushed him, words he would still be repeating at 81, said everything about who he was before anyone had given him a reason to be anything. I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else. He meant it completely. He always meant it completely. The play was called The Shrinking Bride. Off-Broadway. Modest venue, modest production, the kind of thing that doesn't end up in theater history. Rhea Perlman had gone to see a friend in the cast. That was the only reason she was there. She was 22, born and raised in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, the daughter of a Polish immigrant who worked in the toy business. She had studied drama at Hunter College, graduated in 1968, and had been waitressing at the Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center while auditioning for whatever she could find. Sharp and funny, and the kind of person who fills a room without needing to raise her voice. She sat down to watch her friend perform. And then she saw him. There was a stocky man on that stage. Not tall. Not the kind of face that gets you cast as the leading man. But he was commanding that room in a way that made everything else disappear. Something in the timing, in the way he moved, in the specific gravity he seemed to generate just by existing in a space. It made Rhea Perlman forget entirely why she had come. When the show ended, she asked around. Did he have a girlfriend? No. She did not wait for a formal introduction. She did not calculate or hesitate. I had to meet him immediately, she would say years later, still laughing. I came on to him big time. They went to dinner after the show and talked for hours. Danny DeVito, the man who had spent the better part of a decade being told he was wrong in every direction, sat across from this woman from Brooklyn who thought he was the most riveting person she had ever watched on a stage. He would say later that he knew within 22 minutes of meeting her. Not that she might be the one. That she was. 2 weeks later, Rhea moved into his Manhattan apartment. Not a month. Not a cautious courtship. 2 weeks. Two people from similar worlds, with working-class roots and large ambitions and the specific toughness that comes from never having had anything handed to them, who looked at each other and recognized something they hadn't known they were looking for. They lived together for 11 years before getting married. Not because the commitment was uncertain. Because neither of them needed a piece of paper to understand what they already had. The break that changed everything came in 1975. Michael Douglas, now a producer, was making One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, directed by Milos Forman. He asked for Danny. The director resisted. The studio wanted a bigger name. Douglas held firm. Danny was cast as Martini, a psychiatric patient, a role he had actually played years earlier in a stage version of the same story. He was on screen for 5 minutes and 52 seconds. He left a mark that people are still describing 50 years later. The film won 5 Academy Awards. Danny was not nominated. But he was finally, unmistakably, on the map. 3 years later, every agent in Hollywood told him he was making a catastrophic mistake. He turned down 3 film roles to audition for a television sitcom called Taxi. His own agent told him not to do it. Danny had read the script. He knew, the same way he had known when he met Rhea, immediately, in his gut, without needing anyone's confirmation. The character was Louis De Palma. A dispatcher. Mean, petty, and unapologetically awful in every conceivable direction. He walked into that audition and delivered a 7-minute monologue that left the room completely silent. ABC was nervous about his height. Creator James L. Brooks threatened to quit if they didn't cast him. They cast him. Danny signed the contract without negotiating, even though it paid 40% less than what the other actors were receiving. He didn't care. He had recognized something real, and he was not going to let the money talk him out of it. Then in the second season of Taxi, Rhea joined the cast. She played Zena Sherman, Louis De Palma's girlfriend. The producers had no idea that Danny and Rhea had been living together for years. They thought the chemistry was just exceptional acting. It was exceptional acting. It was also two people who knew each other the way very few human beings ever truly know another person. In January of 1982, after 11 years together, they got married. Quietly. Without a production. That same year, Rhea began her role as Carla Tortelli on Cheers, sharp, wisecracking, beloved by tens of millions of American viewers. She would win 4 Emmy Awards for that role. Danny talked about it the way a man talks when the pride he feels is bigger than anything he ever won himself. And while all of that was happening publicly, something else was being built in private. Working at nights, on weekends, around filming schedules, they quietly launched Jersey Films together in 1983. Over the following 2 decades, it became one of the most quietly consequential independent production companies in American cinema. Pulp Fiction. Erin Brockovich. Out of Sight. Garden State. When Quentin Tarantino had been turned away by other studios with his script for Pulp Fiction, Danny and his partners kept it alive. They gave Tarantino office space and $8 million and the room to work. He promised it would look like a $25 million movie. He kept that promise. They did all of this while raising 3 children. Lucy, born in 1983. Grace, born in 1985. Jacob, born in 1987. They kept a rule across those decades. No more than 2 weeks would pass without them working on something creative together. Not performing a marriage. Building something. The clearest window into what that partnership actually looked like was Matilda, in 1996. Danny directed. He played the awful Mr. Wormwood. He cast Rhea as his equally awful wife. Their own children appeared in small roles. And off-camera, the young actress playing Matilda, Mara Wilson, was quietly dealing with her mother's cancer during production. Danny and Rhea became a shelter for her. They cared for her the way you care for someone who belongs to you. Before filming Wrapped, Danny arranged for a near-final cut to be screened at the hospital so Mara's mother could see it before she died. Mara Wilson would say years later that they felt like a favorite aunt and uncle. That they had made something unbearable slightly more bearable in a way she never forgot. The posters and the nominations never captured that. The man who played monsters on screen was, in the quiet places of his life, consistently one of the good ones. Then, in October of 2012, after 30 years of marriage and more than 40 years together, Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman announced their separation. The world reacted as though something had been taken from it. Because in a Hollywood landscape full of relationships that lasted approximately as long as a press cycle, Danny and Rhea had been proof, for an enormous number of ordinary people, that something different was possible. Not a performed love story. 2 real people from real places who had built a real life. You could feel the difference. And now it was gone. Except it wasn't. By March of 2013, 5 months after the announcement, they had reconciled. They went to therapy. 38 sessions by some accounts. Danny rented out the restaurant where they had spent one of their earliest dates. They tried again. They separated a second time in 2017. And still, they did not divorce. When Rhea was asked by the New York Post in 2018 why they had never formally ended the marriage, she answered with the directness of someone who was long past the need to dress anything up. "We've been together a very long time," she said. "There's a lot of love and history. We agree on enough things, so why ruin that with the yucky things that come with a divorce?" Danny bought a house less than a mile from hers. They talked every single day. They met regularly at the same restaurant, at the same table. Their son once noted that they shared a Netflix account and texted each other while watching the same shows from separate houses. When Danny spoke to Fox News Digital in 2024 and someone asked about Rhea, he didn't pause. "We're doing great. We see each other all the time." Then he added the part that said more than any of the rest of it. "You know, Rhea and I met in 1970. We've been together that long and you grow together. It's like you really know how each other's feeling all the time. We participate in conversation daily. That is not how you talk about someone you used to love. That is how you talk about someone you never stopped." In May of 2019, Rhea appeared on Watch What Happens Live and Andy Cohen asked her plainly, would she and Danny ever divorce? She looked at him as if the question genuinely puzzled her. "What for?" she said. And in 2022, she said something that stopped people in their tracks. "Sometimes I wish we were still together, because those were the glory days. But these are other kinds of glory days." There is an entire philosophy of love inside that sentence, if you sit with it long enough. In 2025, Danny began speaking publicly about Fairbanks disease in a way he never had before. Not to draw attention to himself. For the children who couldn't afford treatment. For the people living in daily pain with no one speaking for them. He had been donating for years, more than $12 million toward bone condition research, none of it under his own name, none of it attached to a press release. He cared more about the outcome than the credit. That particular instinct, to give without the applause, ran through everything. The burned contract. The unsigned negotiation. The hospital screening for a child actress's dying mother. A man who measured himself by what he did when no one was watching. He was still saying the same words at 81 that he had said broke and sleeping in a Volkswagen. "I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else." The decades had not softened that conviction. They had only confirmed it. And the thread that runs through all of it, through every rejection and every refusal and every quiet act of generosity that never made a headline, connects back to a woman who walked into a theater one January night, forgot the friend she had come to see, and could not look away from the man on that stage. She had seen him before any credentials existed. She had chosen him when the world was still busy explaining why he didn't fit. She moved into his apartment 2 weeks after meeting him, and she never, in any permanent sense, left. At 81, Danny DeVito is still working. Still playing Frank Reynolds on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, a show he joined in 2006 when it was struggling and has never abandoned. He showed up when they needed him, and he stayed. That has always been something he was very good at. He and Rhea still talk every day. Still share the same table at the same restaurant. Still legally, and in every way that seems to matter to both of them, husband and wife. Asked to describe what Rhea had meant to his life, he answered the way he always answers the things that matter most, without reaching for anything grand. We have 3 beautiful children, and now we have grandchildren. The family's growing. We participate in conversation daily. No sweeping declaration. No poetry. Just a man at 81 describing the shape of his daily life with the person he has known the longest, in the plainest language he could find. Sometimes the plainest language is the truest kind. He was told at every stage that he was not enough. He refused to change. He burned contracts. He showed up in pain and never said why. He gave quietly and without applause. And the woman who had walked into that theater and thought he was the most interesting person in the room, she stayed too. Different house. Same conversation, every single day. Some things do not end just because the form they take changes. Some people find each other before the world has given them any credentials, and the rest of the story, however long and difficult and strange it gets, is just what happens in between the finding and the holding on. Danny DeVito found Rhea Perlman on a January night in 1971. He has not stopped finding her since. And maybe that is the question worth sitting with long after this video ends. Not about them specifically, but about what love is actually supposed to look like when you strip away the version Hollywood sells. Because what Danny and Rhea built was not perfect. It broke. It changed shape. It moved into 2 houses a mile apart and shared a Netflix account and still didn't have a name that fit neatly into any category the world had prepared for it. But it never ended. And neither of them ever seemed to want it to. Is that failure? Or is staying, even in a form the world doesn't quite recognize, sometimes the most honest thing 2 people can do for each other?